Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to Asylums Uncovered, where we discuss the influence and impact of state hospitals on American history and the void left in their absence. A couple of episodes ago, I talked all about Dr. Walter Freeman and the lobotomy's rise to popularity. And to put it frankly, Freeman was a narcissist hellbent on pushing his procedure as a quick fix across state hospitals in America. And despite no training or qualifications as a surgeon, he himself was operating on patients. But Freeman wasn't the only one doing this. Before him, a medical director at Trenton State Hospital in New Jersey was just as big of a megalomaniac and was doing something far worse: surgically removing patients' infected body parts that he believed to be causing psychiatric ailments. A man who goes by the name of Dr. Henry Cotton. I first became familiar with Dr. Henry Cotton while I was looking into the history of Trenton State Hospital. Trenton opened in 1848 and was the first asylum built following the Kirkbride Plan. Over a decade ago, I acquired a letter from the hospital signed by Dr. Cotton, and as I started digging into who he was, I was shocked that someone like him was in charge of an asylum, especially a Kirkbride, a place that was built and constructed following the ideology of moral treatment, where patients were met with compassion, dignity, and respect. And at first, Dr. Cotton's reign started out that way, but soon morphed into something much darker. Born in 1876, Henry Cotton would come to obtain a very impressive resume in the medical field. He studied at the prestigious Johns Hopkins under the most influential psychiatrist of the time, Adolph Meyer. Meyer was the head of the Phipps Clinic, one of the most respected psychiatric centers and training facilities in the United States. He was a heavy hitter at the forefront of integrating biological and psychological studies together, and he was also president of the American Psychiatric Association. So Cotton really couldn't have asked for a better mentor. After a strong endorsement from Meyer, Cotton was appointed as the medical director of Trenton State Hospital in 1907 at 30 years old. This would be the equivalent to Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos giving someone a recommendation in the tech industry. Meyer was a very powerful and influential figure. Running a state institution at such a young age was a huge undertaking. At the turn of the 20th century, asylum admissions were rapidly increasing. Hospitals that were built to house only a couple hundred were overflowing by the thousands. This led to understaffing and underfunding, which resulted in patient neglect and abuse. These places simply did not have the resources for proper patient care, and Trenton was no exception. At first, Dr. Cotton wanted to improve the conditions and be an advocate to the patient's well-being. He did not allow them to be restrained. He introduced occupational therapy as a resource. He implemented training programs for nurses and attendants on better patient interactions, and even held daily meetings with the staff. By all accounts, he seemed very proactive and involved with daily operations. Cotton was a fan of a gentleman named Dr. John Kellogg. And yes, that last name might sound familiar to you. But before the cereal empire, Dr. Kellogg was world famous for something else: running the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan. This institution was a highly coveted wellness destination where people could rest and recharge, get healthy, and then return to their daily lives. It wasn't a place like a state hospital where you were committed for reasons of insanity. The sanitarium focused on holistic treatment, so looking at nutrition, exercise, tobacco and alcohol intake, and really any factor that could impact overall health. Kellogg was a huge believer in germ theory, meaning things like bacteria or viruses can invade the body and cause disease. And because of this, he was very focused on gut health, believing that bacteria in the intestines or a poor diet can cause larger, more harmful health issues. The sanitarium even had its own test kitchen where Kellogg created a food that he believed would be beneficial to his patients, something you may know today as granola. Make no mistake, John Kellogg was way ahead of his time in his views and treatments, so very understandable that Dr. Cotton was influenced by him. At this time, the theory of focal sepsis was commonly shared among doctors. They believed localized infections could cause disease in other parts of the body, including mental illness. But Dr. Cotton was really the one pushing that the infected area needed to be removed immediately. And by today's standards, that's a pretty extreme opinion to have. You might be asking, well, if the area is infected, why didn't he just use antibiotics? In the early 1900s, antibiotics were in their infancy and weren't widely used. Penicillin wasn't even discovered until 1928. And today, as unbelievable as that is, this was a reality for patients at Trenton State Hospital. And this kind of begs the question, was Dr. Cotton a madman cutting people up, or was he simply utilizing the resources he had at the time? And the focal sepsis theory isn't totally wrong. There is something called sepsis-associated delirium, where a patient can become confused, incoherent, or even hallucinate when the body's immune system overreacts to an infection. Cotton first started with the removal of teeth that he believed were infected or could possibly be infected as a precautionary measure. And if that didn't cure the mental illness, Cotton claimed the infection had already spread too far and then would remove organs like the gallbladder, colon, spleen, stomach, and sometimes even men and women's reproductive organs. Pretty much anywhere he thought the infection had spread to was getting removed. And who was he operating on? Literally anyone he thought could benefit from the surgery. Men, women, children, the elderly. It didn't matter. At first, Cotton had a surgeon and a dentist on staff at Trenton to perform these procedures because remember, he wasn't trained or qualified as a surgeon or a dentist. But then he just decides, you know what? How hard can this stuff be? How hard can this surgery thing be? I think I'll just give it a go. What really can go wrong, right? And this is where personally my opinion of Dr. Cotton really changed. Not that I agree with or excuse the belief that the body part needed to be removed, but I can see at the time thinking that this was the best option since antibiotics weren't readily available. But now he's stepping into very dangerous territory. Operating on someone when you're not a surgeon is unethical. It's immoral, it's unsafe, and now it's illegal, but quite frankly, it's just disturbing. And I haven't been able to find anywhere that confirms if Cotton was using any kind of anesthesia while doing these procedures, but there's a good chance that patients felt everything. When you go for a surgery or a procedure today, you're given what is called informed consent. A doctor or a medical professional gives you all the pertinent information, including an explanation of the procedure, risks, benefits, and alternatives, so you have all the information necessary to make an informed decision. That decision also has to be made without coercion. Informed consent is important from both an ethical and a legal standpoint. But that was not the case with Dr. Cotton. When patients and their families would talk to him about a potential surgery, he was very misleading in the information that he was providing. He gave the illusion that this surgery was the magic cure, it was the quick fix, the mental illness would be gone, and there would be no risks and no side effects. Remember, at this time, with hospital admissions being so high, this seemed like a great thing. People could get this surgery, they would be cured, admissions would go down, and the state of New Jersey would save a ton of money. Sounds great, right? Cotton was bold in what he was doing and did not shy away from pushing his methods mainstream. He spoke at academic conferences, newspapers wrote glowing reviews about him, and he even invited people to come watch him at the hospital. He loved the attention he was getting, and with his newfound popularity, people were clamoring to get an appointment with him. He became widely known across the United States and Europe as a pioneer in mental health. No one initially really questioned Cotton. People just blindly took his word. I mean, this was a man educated at Johns Hopkins. He worked with Adolf Meyer. Surely he wouldn't lie or mislead people. But soon, psychiatrists at other institutions wanted to use his methods at their facilities. Come to find out, they were not having these amazing results that Cotton claimed he was having. In fact, a case study showed that these surgeries did not help or make a difference compared to those who did not have a surgery. Despite having high mortality rates, Cotton claimed he had an 85% success rate. Keep in mind, he was self-reporting these numbers, so of course he was going to make himself look good. He was also including the numbers for patients who had died, as he claimed it was a success because they were no longer suffering. So think about this. His negligence has someone killed, and he's including that in his success metrics. You want to talk about demented and deranged? The truth was, at one point, 1 in 3 patients died in his care, with some reports saying that the mortality rate was actually upwards of 45%. That is an alarmingly high number. And how was he able to continue butchering and killing people with no consequences? Well, now people are starting to catch on and begin to question and criticize what Dr. Cotton was doing. But he did not care. He pressed on, ignoring any backlash. Patients were also getting wind of the high death counts, especially when their friends at the state hospital went for surgery and didn't return. It's reported that Cotton pulled teeth and performed surgery on some patients without their consent. If they refused to go willingly, they would literally be dragged down the hall kicking and screaming. Can you imagine how horrifying that must have been to the other patients or even the staff that was working there? Seeing that just had to be so terrible and gut-wrenching. In 1924, Dr. Phyllis Greenacre, another former student of Adolph Meyer, did an independent investigation of Cotton's methods at Trenton. And it's a little unclear what exactly sparked this investigation. Some reports say that after a visit to the hospital, Meyer quietly expressed concern. And other reports say that after mounting external criticism, Cotton wanted to get out in front of any accusations and control the narrative. Whatever the case, Greenacre came to the conclusion that these surgeries were not actually helping the patients. And feeling the pressure that he would be exposed, Cotton tried to derail the investigation by giving messy and conflicting reports and being overall unhelpful. And you would think if he was having these amazing results, he would hand over all of his records and say, "Here they are, now leave me alone." And I just can't imagine what Dr. Greenacre was witnessing at Trenton. I'm sure going into a state hospital was shocking enough to the senses. Now think about seeing those patients, but with no teeth, unable to speak, unable to eat, all while dealing with the mental illness still because these surgeries weren't helping it. And the odd thing is, the findings of her investigation were never fully made public. But what was the reason for this? Was Dr. Adolph Meyer reluctant to expose Cotton? No one really knows for sure. With that investigation going nowhere, multiple complaints from patients, staff, and family members went to the New Jersey State Senate, where they hoped something would finally be done and Dr. Cotton would be stopped from doing these horrific procedures. But the Senate stood behind him and gave him their full support. It was like he was untouchable. Thinking about being a patient there and having this done to you and no one is helping, no one is stepping up and saying that this is barbaric, this should have never happened, is so sad. In fact, there's even newspaper headlines that say Trenton Asylum is a model hospital. This leads me to believe, since these procedures were potentially saving the state a ton of money, they weren't going to proactively shut it down, at least not until they had to. And during these allegations, Dr. Cotton conveniently declares that he has infected teeth and is now insane. But after removing his teeth and these allegations start to blow over, he is miraculously cured. And as if this couldn't get any darker, Dr. Cotton even removed the teeth of his own wife and his 2 sons as a preventative measure against mental illness. There was nothing wrong with them. He just simply never wanted them to become insane. And I do think it's worth noting that years later, both of his sons did take their own lives. And I can't help but wonder how much of their father's actions played into this, which is incredibly tragic. Cotton eventually opened a private clinic where he continued to perform surgery and teeth extractions for wealthy clients who thought his methods were at the forefront of modern medicine. He served as medical director at Trenton for over 20 years. And during his tenure there, he performed over 600 surgeries, extracted more than 11,000 teeth, killed hundreds of people, and mutilated many others. He died in 1933 at the age of 56 from a heart attack. And just to think, after he passed, patients probably felt some kind of relief, only to have the lobotomy rise to popularity a few years later. Today, Trenton State Hospital still operates as a functioning psychiatric facility. I don't think Cotton was ever insane. I think he was a narcissist driven by his own ego and desire to make a name for himself. His resume was already incredibly impressive, and there was no reason he needed to take such extreme measures to make a name for himself. aside from his own self-serving purposes. Instead of being remembered as a doctor who helped patients, he will forever be remembered as a sadist who killed patients and maimed countless others. All right, everyone, that's it for me today. Thank you for listening, and until next time.